Hi everyone, for Mixing Light, this is Kaylee Bateman and I'm here today with CJ Dobson, who is an amazing colorist in Melbourne, and I've known of her and sort of tangentially met her in passing quite a few times, but I've known her for as long as I've been in the industry. She's a absolute pillar of the Melbourne community, and she's been colouring for 15 years. She's originally from Wellington and moved to Melbourne early on in her career and worked at Digital Pictures, which is where I first heard of her. She was doing really cool things, working at DigiPix, making great music videos and colouring under the 6 senior colorists there, and sort of building on the knowledge that she already had from freelance colouring in Wellington and then in Melbourne. And then at around 2012, I think it was, she went freelance and had a couple of home suites, but mainly was freelancing all around Melbourne at different post facilities. Had a lot of really good connections with agencies, and I sort of knew her in a short form capacity. She was doing a lot of TVC colouring at that point in her career. And now, very excitingly, she's just opened a new facility called Moodlab Film Looks, which is a big deal, and it's a bit different to other post facilities. She's definitely given it its own spin and its own take on what a facility can be. And it's quite exciting, and it's also really exciting to see a woman being entrepreneurial and founding a business in this space. Because it can be a bit techie and a bit of a male-dominated field. So I'm very thrilled to have her here today to talk about her trajectory from freelance colorist into, founder and owner of a facility, and to find out a bit more about Mood Labs and what they have to offer. So welcome.
Thanks, Kaylee. It's wonderful to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, anytime.
I am not from Wellington, but I did start my career there. Yeah, there's not many, other than Auckland, there's probably not many other places you can start out in the film industry, but I'm from a much smaller town.
Oh, so you do that thing that we all do when we grow up in the country and you move to the big smoke to do some work. Oh, that's cool. And windy Wellington, how long were you there for?
I just lived in Wellington for 2 years.
That's good though. That's like long enough to really feel like you're a local after 2 years, right?
Oh yeah, it was a great time. I mean, Wellington is just the best city apart from the weather. The weather is just, it's awful. On a good day though, I love Wellington.
Oh, I've only been there for a couple of days and I spent most of that indoors in a suite, but I just thought it was such a beautiful city. Like it was kind of Melbourne-y though, so it kind of makes sense why you moved to Melbourne, because lots of the cafe culture and little microbreweries, and it looked like a lot of art and culture, like a really cool spot to be.
It's a funny story. It's one day difference in my life where I could have, the next day I was actually offered a job at Cutting Edge in Sydney. But the day before I accepted this job at Digital Pictures in Melbourne. So like one day different and I could have had a whole, it's like this whole other life.
It's a sliding doors moment right there.
Yeah, totally.
Well, I think Melbourne is lucky to have you. So glad that you didn't end up in Sydney.
Me too. I love Melbourne. We have this amazing community of colorists in Melbourne.
That's
I
very
just
true.
love, like, we catch up and we like go have a beer, and it's really wonderful and supportive. And I think that feels, maybe because there are so many of us, that we can do that, but it does feel like kind of uniquely a Melbourne thing that we're so close.
Yeah, I really love that actually, and I often see that from afar, because I was Melbourne-based for a short time and now I'm Brisbane-based, and there are actually people who've travelled down to Melbourne to do the colorist catch-ups who are Brisbane-based. So, I
Angela,
think it's kind of the envy of Australia really in terms of that community. How lovely.
Yeah, we should have more, like maybe like set ones for, for all of us to kind of get together as well. Sometimes there's ones in Sydney, but
oh, definitely. And I think that kind of cross-pollination that we don't really get as much now, and I think we're going to return to this idea, but, when there were those big facilities and you could have multiple colorists working there at the same time, full-time, and you could have multiple people in support roles coming up, we miss that because we haven't really had that for a while. So having those social opportunities to get together and to just have a chat about, this crazy thing that we do, such a lovely and unique thing.
Just be alongside your peers and connecting. It's so important. And I think that's really true for me and for yourself as well, having been in a bigger shop. I remember sitting around and when it was quiet at Digital Pictures and there were 7 of us. I remember this one day, 7 colorists sitting in a room. It was so great just to be able to kind of like chat and talk about our processes, and for me to be able to, as someone a little more new to the industry, connect with those, all those guys and see how they work was so valuable. And I know that the other freelance colorists and colorists who have like smaller shops as well here, like we all really crave that. So that's why we do
Definitely. I
catch
mean, I'd
up.
love to actually ask you about that. So moving from that, seven colorist shop to
Yeah.
freelancing, was that a bit of a shock to the system?
I was so ready for it. I think when I got to digital pictures, it was busier, and over the course of 3 years, it really quietened down to the point where we weren't really um, permitted, I guess, to like go out and even like seek work because they were transferring ownership of the business. Like we were basically shutting down, and I think I can say this because the business doesn't exist anymore. But I know they were hiring people for fear of them being competition. So it wasn't because we had enough work. And as the non-senior, like everyone was senior, and then there was me. I kind of got the dregs. And so by the end of my 3 years, I was so ready to get out on my own. I already was self-taught. Like I love the gear, and I was like, all this stuff was changing. The tangent elements were just coming out, and Resolve was like couple of versions along, and I was just like, this is the right time for me to be out on my own. As much as I miss some things about it, it was so valuable having my time there. But 3 years was enough. Was
Yeah,
enough.
so what were the things that you missed, and how did you kind of bring those back into your freelance practice?
I think the thing like we talked about was connecting with other people like who do what you do, because it is kind of lonely being freelance. And for 10 years when I was freelance, I missed that, and that's part of why I also wanted to start a shop and like actually have a team, because I think as a group you can achieve more than you can on your own.
I
Um,
can't agree
yeah,
with you enough about that.
yeah,
And I probably should have mentioned this before we really started going, but I've actually just opened up something myself up here,
yeah.
and it.
Congratulations!
Thank
I
you.
listened to your interview with Warren as
Oh,
well recently.
great. Oh,
So
so you
yeah,
know I've got this little sort of
yeah.
two-room thing going on. It's a bit of a
It sounds really
boutique.
similar.
Yeah,
It
it
sounds like
look
we're doing a similar thing.
in some
Mm.
ways it's similar. I think in other ways what you're doing is a little bit more revolutionary. You've kind of put an interesting spin on it, and you've definitely got, I think, a really strong business approach, just looking at what you guys do and how you kind of flow charted it out of like you pick an artist, you pick a space, and you guys take care of the rest. It's really, I think, an interesting take on post and facilities in general. So before we get too much into that, I just wanted to say, like, I wonder what it was that made you open Mood Labs, and I feel like you might have already kind of answered that a little bit.
Yeah, I think probably one of the other driving factors is as a freelancer, I was kind of being put in a lot of situations where you know, monitors were not calibrated. Things just weren't working. Like software needed an update, and then when you update, inevitably when you update something, it's like this domino effect of everything else needing updates, and then 4 hours later you haven't started the grade. So I think as a freelancer, to have a facility that if I book it, I know I'm going to show up, and like we have configurations for and like artist specific configurations, and people conforming. So it's all kind of ready to go, and you can trust in that, and they're not wasting time, because nothing worse than getting into a session and like being on the back foot, and then everyone arrives and nothing's kind of ready to go, and you haven't even had a chance to like put a LUT on the footage. And so that was one driving factor for me. It was just like, I just want somewhere that people can come and it's totally neutral. Like when clients contact us, we give them the list of artists and say, you pick. Like I would never book myself on something first. It's always up to the client to choose who they prefer to work with.
I think
So
that
that was
is.
kind of unique. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is very unique. And I think that point that you raise about, when you're freelancing, you're kind of going around to different facilities and you're really at the mercy of where they're up to in terms of their tech journey and you might be working on a 10-year-old machine, or you might be working on something that was bought a week ago. You don't know most of the time. And even within one facility, they don't usually clue in freelancers if they're doing major upgrades or if they have kit that's off site for another purpose. You just kind of roll in, and what you've got is what you've got. And you've usually got about 10 minutes to work it out before someone comes in. So I can definitely sympathise with that, and also I think that was a motivation for me as well to have a space. Was then you've got that control over your system, and you can just decide when it's time to upgrade. You don't need to go through a process with IT and oh, we can't do that because the operating system does this, and then we won't be able to use this other piece of gear, and it's a
Yeah.
nightmare. So
There is something really exciting about being a new business and being a small business, and you can be a little bit more nimble about, you know, the trends in the industry, and you can adapt and change. I mean, we're so on the cusp of like, I feel like everything moving online, where, all of the cloud-based workflows are something that we're really developing and looking at, and being able to like get ready for that, and be ready and not be in a business where you've like invested tens of thousands of dollars in like storage and
exactly. You don't have to write emails to the board to say, look, it's time, we have to bring in this new bit of gear. And they'll say, but we just spent 100 grand only 15 years ago. How is that not still good?
yeah,
So it's great
yeah,
that you've got that ability, and you're only really beholden to yourself there, and you can say, this is how I see things moving. That's where we're going.
yeah.
It's interesting that you raised the cloud, because I did notice that you've got a cloud-based dailies offering, which is really interesting, and I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, so we're still in our development phase. We're kind of at the moment offering it to basically small projects, ones that we kind of already have a bit of a relationship with the clients as well, and we're testing it. But essentially, the idea is, I'll give you a little bit more backstory, because I was a telecine operator. When at Digital Pictures, most of what came through, the facility was graded before it went to offline. And then when everything sort of transitioned into digital, we like lost this step in the chain, and people for years were watching everything in log and getting used to it. And it's a human it's human nature to get used to something, and your brain sort of switches at a point to think that's reality. That's natural, even though
Mm,
it's log, which is like super far from natural, right?
mm,
So I think a lot of colorists have had that experience where we're trying to get people you're in a final grade, and people are nervous about these transformations that are happening, and they end up kind of watering it down and bringing it back to pretty much close to the offline. So my mission with Moodlab is to sort of shake that up, like change it back to what it was. But because of cloud workflows, we don't have to be so bookended about it. It doesn't have to be like everything has to be graded daily. It's like having a Fergus Halley in a van, on set. Like, not every production is going to have the budget for that. So why not use the cloud to actually have a little bit more of a holistic approach and be more selective about the footage that you want to be treated? So with the cloud workflows that we're developing, for example, on the short film, they gave me a bunch of references. This is kind of their reference. After the editor made their selects, I got them to output an XML for me, like just a rough XML. It doesn't need to be tidied up. It's not like a conform. It's just a selection pool of media. We gave all of that media the treatment, really basic grade, nothing, no secondaries, just primaries. And then they've been sitting with that for a couple of weeks, and then we checked in with them and said, what do you think? How's it feeling? The director was like, I'm pretty happy. The cinematographer said, what if this scene felt a little more like this? And so we jumped in, we grabbed that scene, and we gave it a different look, another version, and we updated the media pool. So it's like a bucket, and then the editor syncs to that. And then they can sit with that for a couple of weeks. And when they come to do the final grade, both versions are there, ready to go. We're ready to start off from that point. That's the concept. We're not ready to fully roll it out yet, because like constantly the technology is changing, and we're trialing different applications, because there's still a couple of little pain points, but That's the concept, and that's where I feel like the industry is going to go there. As a colorist, I really feel like grading can be split into two parts. You know, you've got your, I think your like setup of your look and your balance, and then you've got your secondaries, your finesse, your polish, and I sort of see those as two different parts. And I think that first part, in my opinion, should actually kind of happen alongside editorial. It shouldn't wait until final grade.
Absolutely. It sounds like what you're doing is bringing in a really long form approach to all productions, because that's something, the higher budget, long form, you'll have a show lot and then you might have some LMTs for particular scenes if you want them to be cooler, warmer, brighter, darker, what have you. And that's something that we never saw in short form context because it was just a very quick process. I think time often was the problem there. But I suppose when you're working in the cloud and you can work simultaneously on the same project, then you can make use of that time that they're in edit to be developing the look. So it's quite clever, really. That's
And I've
great.
spoken with commercial clients about it as well, because I think whenever I bring it up, someone's like, "Oh, that's obviously just for long form," but just as many commercial clients have fight these battles with their client, like the brand or the product. Sort of, I mean, I had an example where I was talking with a producer, and they're struggling with this real estate client. There's They just keep making edit changes because things aren't bright enough. I think it's a lot to ask of a client to imagine or to understand the process. So why not have a system where you can just do a quick brightness and they could just go, here's our selects, here's a rough cut. Can you just give it a pass? And knowing that none of that's being wasted. I mean, there's a lot of times when assistant editors are kind of thrown that task
That's right.
and then it
Tidied
all
up.
ends up in the bin.
And then do you find that people are still cutting in Avid, or are people starting to cut more in Resolve? Because I could see this really working well if you're all in a Resolve Cloud project.
Yeah. It's a mixture. I think the more experienced editors are still mostly Avid based. And then in the kind of commercial world, it's a mixture of Premiere and Avid, and there's a few who are starting to make the move to Resolve. And we're trying to encourage people because we think it's a pretty good editing system. And yeah, absolutely, as you say it's for our kind of approach, it works really well.
Mm. Do you have any particular technologies you're using, or is there something proprietary that you've got under wraps?
Oh, no, it's something proprietary under wraps. Like I said, we've been trialing different applications, and I don't want to say anything because some of them haven't been great, and we're trying to move away from them.
Got you.
But yeah, we're still in that phase. And actually, Mars Williamson and I are going over to NAB show, and we're super excited to talk with different developers and things about where they're at as well. So that will helpfully kind of feed into where we end up.
That's really exciting. Have you been to NAB before?
No, I am so I've always wanted to go, and I'm so excited to go.
That's great.
It's
Oh, I hope you have the best time.
It's going to be like our little Melbourne catch-ups, but like on steroids.
Yeah, that's right. And I think everyone's going to be so psyched to actually be there in person. It's going to have a good vibe. So you picked a good year, I think.
Yeah, it's funny. I always wanted to go, like even when I was at Digital Pictures, I wanted to go. But now that I have a shop and I was like not super busy, I think like a project was booked and then got moved. And I was like, yes, this is the time.
Yeah.
Gotta do it. Gotta go.
Yeah, that's right. So just moving on a little bit from the technology, I'm interested to know, with the approach behind Mood Labs, the facility is almost BYO artist, even though you've got like a selection of people that you obviously work closely with. And I wondered what the idea was behind structuring it in that way and having that kind of flexibility.
Yeah, I think I wanted to have a point of difference. I didn't feel ready or really, I don't really want to be a post house because I want to be on the tools and I want to be working. And if I can have a nice space, and we've got 2 rooms, if it gets booked up with other artists, then that's wonderful. I can pick up some freelance and go and work somewhere else, or have some time off, which is also nice. And I think there's, particularly with the lockdowns and stuff, there's a lot of clients going directly to their artist. And so it's sort of targeting that market where they don't necessarily want to go to a full boutique post shop, but it's like it's between freelance and a boutique, like a full post service place. It's somewhere in the middle there. you still get all the nice sort of treatment of being in a facility, but it's a little bit more flexible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the scenario would be then like a client approaches a colorist directly and says, I'd love to book you for a grade. And they say, well, you'll want to attend and the client's going to want to attend. So, we'll have to go somewhere nice. Let's book a lab at Mood Labs and off you go. And support-wise, do you have sort of, those bells and whistles, someone brings in the coffees and all of that? Yeah, because that's hard to do from home.
Yeah, yeah, and it does make a big difference when you've got, I mean, sometimes on commercial you can have, over 10 people in a room, so having somebody there to make sure everyone's feeling looked after
Absolutely.
and all
No
of
one's
that
going to
help.
approve a grade on an empty stomach. It doesn't happen.
Sometimes it's good to distract them too with some treats.
Yeah. That's so true. Get some work done while they're eating.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
What was the inspiration for the look and the design? Because it's really quite gorgeous what you've done with the space.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I had a very clear vision of the kind of aesthetic. It's really fun. People have started, referring to things as being very mood lab, which I just absolutely love because it's exactly that. Like, I wanted it to feel moody, um, but also have a playfulness and a brightness. So the branding has a lot of color. Like, our brand color is holographic. Like it's just every color. And then of course the rooms have to be fairly neutral. So we've got the grey paint, but even the grey paint, I decided, oh, how am I going to make this like a little more interesting? So I've done this two-tone thing. So we've got the kind of the mid grey on top as a pet, like as a wash. So it's got this kind of almost fake concrete look to it. Yeah, I think a part of our roles as colorists is taste. So I think this, for me, I wanted the space to reflect having good taste and having style because ultimately people hire us to have that
Mm-hmm.
to do
Oh,
that. So it's important to me.
very successfully done. Nice job.
Oh, thank you.
How are you finding being a founder of, I want to say a facility. I know it's not a post facility, but it is a facility,
Yeah,
um,
studio
a
facility. Yeah.
studio facility.
Mm.
Um, are you finding that there are different challenges to being a colorist, to running a studio space?
Oh yeah, I think essentially I've been in the zone of like I was calling it phase one, which is like the setting up phase, which is it's a lot of work, like from trademarking the name to employee contracts and all of that stuff. It's completely new to me, and there's always going to be sort of like roadblocks and speed bumps along the way, and it's been quite draining that phase. I think we've just started to enter into our phase two, which will more operational, but yeah, there's definitely that side of it now where I have to be a little bit more selective about my time and delegating as well. I just have to yeah, get other people to come in and help me in areas where I'm as a freelancer and stuff. I was so used to doing everything myself, and I still do a lot of it. I've done the website. I've done kind of like a lot of it myself.
Oh,
Um,
wow. That's cool. I mean, it's a great website. Looks really good.
Thanks. I think it still needs some work, but thank you.
Oh, that's great. I
Yeah,
mean, clearly you've got those design kind of that enough of that design background to utilize it in interior design and web design and a whole range of different contexts. And I think perhaps being in short form and in commercials for such a long time, you must have been surrounded by, creative directors, art directors, and branding people, and you probably seen more successful branding than most people because it's literally your job to watch and
yeah.
to
Mm.
participate in that process of creating it. So I do wonder if all of that has helped to bring all of these cool ideas into fruition.
I think that's a really good point, and a good friend of mine actually did the branding for me, who I know through commercials. So, it is absolutely true.
Well, you've got a good pool of people, good pool of experts to draw on when you do need to delegate something.
Yeah, yeah, that's the biggest thing, delegating and having, being able to admit, and I would say, going back to, touching on me being like a woman and starting business, is this imposter syndrome that like a lot of women have. Um, and being able to tell myself it's okay not to know, and to actually, if someone asks me a question, to be like, actually, my teammate is more across that than me, is something that, I have to come to terms with and be like, I don't have to know everything. And actually, I can't know everything.
Mm.
So being able to say, all right, I'm going to focus on these areas and I want you to find out this, and this for me. And then try and be across things, of course, but like not have to understand absolutely everything about the business. It's just, you just can't, like, and also be an operator.
Mm.
Yeah. So, and I mean, one of the best things is I have a bookkeeper now, so I don't have to do my own invoices.
Ah, that's
It's so
amazing.
good. Yeah, it's so nice.
So freeing.
Yeah, and that's a big weight off my shoulder. So I'm looking forward to, building the team up as well. In the early days, we can't have that many people. We just need to start generating more income before the team can grow. But as it grows, I'm looking forward to being able to, you know, delegate and nominate roles and things, and spend some time. I'm really looking forward to having juniors doing first passes for me, and then I can go and do some research and development, and talk with clients and things like that as well. Yeah, that's exciting. The junior thing is something new,
Yeah,
and
I feel like we
yeah,
just touched on so many things there, and I'm like, which one are we going to open into more? Before we get
mm,
into the juniors, I do just want to ask, because I was going to ask you about being a woman in business and also in
mm,
this industry in general, and you've already kind of mentioned imposter syndrome, which I can relate to
mm,
quite a bit.
yeah.
Do you find that there are any particular challenges to founding a business as a woman, or is that sort of not really a gendered kind of consideration?
I think it would be naive to think, the gender thing, as it doesn't play into business, and particularly, as you also touched on earlier, being technical in this field. Unfortunately, the pattern is that um, people don't afford trust to women as easily. I do have to work a little bit harder for people to feel comfortable and safe with me with the gear. Now, I've been doing this for 15 years and I still have that challenge. Most of the time, people feel very comfortable because I'm very confident with it. I feel now with the business, I have to do that again, but in another capacity where I'm just not afforded the same trust immediately as a generalization. Like, certainly, a lot of people are super supportive as well, and give me the benefit of the doubt. But I think that's probably the biggest challenge.
I feel
Yeah,
like you're almost like I've joked about needing a male figurehead just for certain meetings.
yeah,
Um, Obviously, I
yeah.
haven't done that, and I have no intention of doing that. But to me, it feels like you've either got "Yay, women in business" and "Let's go for a
Mm.
government grant," or it's like, "What are you doing here?"
Yeah, yeah.
So
Like,
it's very
where's the
polarizing.
guy?
Yeah,
Like, talk about technology here. Like, you're
yeah,
like,
yeah,
yeah. I know,
yeah.
I know some stuff about technology.
Yeah, yeah.
um,
It can be highly
but
frustrating, I think.
yeah,
I
yeah, it
don't
can
wanna
be.
get too bogged down in it, but I just thought it'd be interesting to know, whether or not that's something that you'd come across or, we've come a long way from, like, getting, slap on the butt and, like, "Where's my coffee?" But, I think
Yeah.
there's still a fair bit of unspoken stuff
So much
to
bias.
wade
There's
through.
still there's still a lot of bias, and it's so interesting because sometimes people, I think, even on the other end of the spectrum, come across as like they want to really support you, but um, that can kind of undermine your abilities as well. Where they're like, oh, I get this. I don't know if you get this, but I get this. Like, you're such an artist, you're so
Mm,
creative,
that's right.
all
Or
the
they
time.
make a point of you being a woman, and it's like,
Yeah,
it's not about
yeah,
that.
yeah. So I think we have a long way to go. I
Mm.
do think it's important to, and that's another reason why I was like, I have to do it. I had other people approach me to partner or to join their business or whatever, and I was like, no, there's no women with their own shop here in Melbourne.
That's
As
true.
colorists, we
Mm,
have one facility, Mr. Fox with Flick, who's a flame artist. She's a co-owner, but other than that, really, I can't think of any other space where women are running a post shop or
mm,
like a color grading studio. So that was important to me as well because while I don't like to focus on gender, it's there, you know, it's part of our experience, it's part of the challenges that we face.
Absolutely. We can't
And
get
it's
away from it.
important to acknowledge it. Yeah. Yeah. And to be like, no, I'm going to take up this space. I deserve to be in this space. Um, to talk to that imposter syndrome, which comes from all of those questions that you get from people. I have memories of like being in digital pictures and being the most experienced person on the luster across resolve conform. I like basically ran the kind of conform side of the TVC department at Digital Pictures. And I would be saying to a client, all right, there's a problem here, whatever. And I would explain it. And their eyes would dart over to the guys in the room
Yeah.
every time. And they didn't have as much knowledge as me, but every time you're faced with that and it affects you, yeah, it does affect you, but you have to push through it, I guess.
Absolutely.
And that's another reason why at Moodlab at the moment, you know, I've got Mars with me, and the rest of the team are all women as well. That wasn't really intentional, but there's something to be said about people having similar experiences and understanding, and then being able to support each other through those feelings of, you know, that imposter syndrome feeling, and then recognizing that and being there to support each other because it's something quite unique
Oh, I couldn't
to
agree
certain
with you
people.
more. I couldn't agree with you more. I mean,
Yeah.
that's just, I think it's wonderful. And Mars is great. You've mentioned her a couple of times. I
Yeah.
spent a very short period of time with her in Sydney at the start of last year. She came up to help on a grade that I was in, and she's just amazing. She's
Yeah.
just
She's
great. Like,
awesome.
she came into a grade that was already well and truly underway, and she just hit the ground running and clearly knew exactly what she was doing and was an absolute pleasure personally to be around.
Mm.
So she's a good pick for your team.
Yeah, she's awesome. And yeah, we're stoked to have her around doing that. You know, I think like being like having women running businesses and women being like on the tech, on the tools is really important. And for me, like being able to take up that space and be in that space is something like another really important thing to me. I mean, I know it's hard. People go, "Oh, you're playing the gender card," but quite frankly, like I don't have a choice. Like it's there,
It's
and I
kind
will
of
tell
been
you,
played already.
it's been played, and I can tell you that us being all women is serving against us more than it's serving for us.
That's
Unfortunately,
right. Well,
still,
I don't mean to say
yeah.
that's right as in it is, but like, you know, if you think about playing the gender card, it's sort of very much from the back foot, right? Like,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And you know, and that's why it is great because I feel like you've probably had similar experiences to me, and I think it's important that we communicate and that we all know we're not alone in that.
mm,
It's not like, yeah.
yeah, I think it's really interesting because I completely sympathise with those moments where people would be looking towards a man in the room to sort of validate a technical direction, or even, you know, I've had people just straight up say to me, "Oh, I assumed you couldn't do that." You know, we were talking about setting up port forwarding or something for a remote grade, and I was like, "All right, well, we just need to do this and this," and they're like, "Oh, I assumed you couldn't do that," and it's like, just say it straight to my face. All right then. Well, at least we don't have to, you know, guess about what you think. It's straight out there. But it is something that we're going to come across time and time again. But you know, I think that there's multiple ways as well to be proficient. And I know this isn't an interview about me, but, you know, I feel like there's kind of a couple of cliches of like either you're on the artist side and you don't understand the tech, or you're super techy, but you're not particularly crafty. And I think that, you know, just like there are completely different lived experiences of anything that's normally in binary opposition, I think that, you know, that there are different ways to be technically savvy and creative and artistic and craft based at the same time, which, you know, we're always going to find our own point on the continuum. And it's just about people learning that it's not black and white there.
No, it's a spectrum.
Mm,
Yeah, and for people to learn and be educated that you shouldn't look at someone and make a judgment based on their age, their gender, their background. Like all of that needs to just go. And it's what they're used to. They're used to, I
mm,
mean, I still see, you know, pages of colorists and like 90% of them are guys.
mm.
More internationally, we probably have a bit more of a balance here in Melbourne, but um, It's just
Gets a
what
bit
people are used
boring.
to. And I go to events and people are like, "Are you a producer?"
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Jeez.
uh,
Have you had any resistance or any feedback from any other post facilities or anywhere that like a full colouring offering kind of facility since you've opened Mood Labs?
No, and it's actually been on my list of things to do is to reach out to them and talk to them a little bit about what we're doing here. Because I would love to, in an ideal world, collaborate with other post houses and think of us as like a bit of an injection of color, and particularly with our cloud-based stuff, it doesn't need to be even necessarily at our facility. Um, so I am hopeful that we can collaborate and we can work together. Uh, in fact, and we've come close to having other post facilities that have overflow and they need to book a space. And so we're here for that too.
Mm. That's great, yeah, because it's kind of, it's I don't feel like it's a particularly productive way of doing things to see people as competition when especially when you've got a small boutique offering like this, because if you're considered competition by the giant businesses, it's like, "Come on, guys, like, let someone else exist in the space." So that's really good that you haven't seen anything like that so far. And, oh, you mentioned senior and junior colorists, and I know that you've done a workshop as well. So I take it that education and training is a big part of the philosophy at Mood Labs?
Yeah. Yeah, and very much one thing we want to do is with our panel discussions and things like that is to keep it fairly broad. I had someone else approach me about doing intensives, and I'm like, well, I'm interested in that. It's not really where I think the work needs to be done. I think the work needs to be done on a broader scope. Like, let's tell everyone about the importance of color and that relationship between us and the cinematographer and the production. So our first panel that we had was about setting the look, and that was we had the Cinematography Society were kind of supporting us, and the Colorist Society, and we had two DOPs and two colorists. Fergus Kelly was on it with me, and Mars was moderating. So we had this like fantastic conversation about setting up the look. What is that process? What does it look like on different productions? And it was more conceptual. Like I want it to be accessible. I want producers to come along and understand what we're talking about, and I want directors. We had a lot of directors there, and I feel like there's a lot of education to be done in that space, and that's where Mood Lab kind of wants to be kind of doing videos, whether it's online or whatever it might be, just little snippets to be like have some insight that's on a more broader scale, like for the industry and beyond. One of our other events we want to do is on like the human visual system and optical illusions and things like that, because that all plays into what we do as well in the room. So,
Absolutely. That sounds fascinating. I'd say there's got to be a lot of research and there's a lot of time that would go into something like that.
yeah.
Was it particularly labor intensive to get the first look development talk off the ground?
Yeah, it was a bit of work. One of the assistants here was working pretty hard on getting stages and chairs and all of that stuff. I think having done one, we'd be like more ready to do a second. We're thinking 3 a year. So we're not going too ambitious
Mhm. That
because it is a
sounds
lot of
that
work.
sounds like you could actually fit that in, right? Because you've also got
Yeah.
to be colouring and running a business, so you've
Mm.
got a few things to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah, no, and for us it's also a networking night too. So we had drink sponsors, and we all talked about the ideas and the concepts, and it was just so wonderful. It was such a great night and great atmosphere. So hopefully we can keep that going.
That's so
But
great.
then we
I'll
want to
have to
do
come
just little
down.
snippets as well. Yeah, please come to
I'd
the
love to
next
come
one. We're
down
thinking
and have a look.
HDR for the next one. Yeah.
Oh, that's exciting. I did actually hear on the grapevine the things that you hear from calibration experts, but I heard that you'd purchased an ISO HDR monitor.
Yeah,
That's
yeah, instead of a new
exciting.
car.
Yeah. Look, I'm sitting in front of my Sony HDR monitor, so I get it.
I know. I heard. I'm like, oh my gosh, how did she? I like. It's just. There's a lot of money. So
Yeah,
expensive.
honestly, I keep thinking like I could
Oh,
have had an entire extra room on my house if I'd not bought it, but you got to look at it every day, right? If you're a carpenter, you'd want a really good saw. So
that's it. And I think if you're going to invest in a monitor now and you have the ability to go into HDR, you just absolutely have to, because
that's
that's where
right.
we're going.
Yeah, my thinking was it's 20,000 to get a decent SDR Sony, so
Mm.
it's already
Yeah,
stupid. In for a
and
penny, in for a pound, just do it. Are you
totally.
liking the ISO?
Yeah, I do like it. I graded a series on it recently at another facility, different, like the same model,
Mhm.
but a different monitor, and it was yeah, it was beautiful. I've
Oh,
worked
great.
on I've worked on the Flanders and the Sony as well. But yeah, it's just such a different experience working in HDR. I
Mm.
love it, and kind of going back to SDR, I'm like I'm so ready for SDR to be done with.
Yeah, you
But
kind of
yeah.
get hooked on having that extra dynamic range and that extra,
Yeah.
like, color saturation that you get, there's, like, a totally different feel to it.
Absolutely. And I always use this analogy. It's a bit like grading an SDR feels like like trying to shove like a sleeping bag into like a sleeping bag cover. And you're just like, oh, get in there. Like, come on. I feel like it's more intuitive and it lands in a place that feels more natural. But there's a lot of room for it to go wrong if you don't have good taste,
Mm,
in my opinion,
mm.
because you don't have as much limited range.
So if
Yeah.
people ask you to dial it up and up and up and up, you actually can, and then you can end up with something that looks like a Christmas tree.
Yeah, well, something that can actually like, be uncomfortable to watch.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's so true. Like you're staring into another dimension.
Mm, yeah,
So
yeah.
sorry, just to kind of go back from HR, I wasn't planning on talking about that, but just came up. Um, with the junior and senior colorist dynamic that you're talking about, I think that's really interesting and really important. And as you're aware, I employ a junior colorist, and I just think, I found it difficult to get into the industry myself to begin with and to develop the
Mm,
skills that were required. And I think possibly we've had a lot of similarities between our careers at different points in terms of, learning from generous mentors and seeing the value in
mm,
that. So, can you talk to me a little bit about that, that kind of development that you're doing to
mm.
help foster the next generation? Because it's super important, I think.
I absolutely agree, and it's so difficult for new talent to get that experience and feedback because I think generally now a new colorist is just launched straight into a session with clients without having any understanding of maybe how you might run a session, time management, techniques to help your client along as well, because you're guiding them. And I think as a new colorist, without that, you can really get stuck in some holes
Yeah,
with
and it's
clients.
almost unfair to say sink or swim when you haven't given
Yeah.
them swimming lessons first.
Yeah, and no matter how many YouTube tutorials you do or like, mixing light tutorials you do, whatever it is, it doesn't teach you that inter-client relationship as well. And for me, another thing I really like benefited from at Digital Pictures was doing the telecine and doing the dailies. We get the film roll at like 7 in the morning from the lab, and then I would have until 8, 8 or 9 sometimes to get it onto tape and get, that tape was getting picked up to take to the the edit facility to start their offline, and you've got to power through and you've got to get that done, and you only stop when you need to stop and go back, but most of the time you're grading in real time, and I think that's really cool as well. So as a training ground, you don't get into that trap that new colorists do where they overcook it. You have to go fast. So I think for the daily side of Moodlab, we're excited to have juniors training on dailies because there's less stakes. I can come in, I can supervise, I can check how it's looking. And then that's also cost effective, for clients. They don't have to have a senior on it from the start. They can have a senior supervise.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I think it was so good for everyone involved, right? Like literally everyone wins in that scenario. And the cool thing about having a deadline is, like you say, they don't overcook it, and also, the most important thing is that balance, that primary. It doesn't matter how, like, you can't kind of bring it back with a bunch of secondaries if you can't get the primary right. You're kind of in
Mm.
trouble. So,
Yeah.
and also just to get you 10,000 hours, right? Like, you just have to look at a
That's
lot of
it.
images
You
and do it
do.
a
You
lot.
just have to do a lot. Absolutely. Yeah, practice, practice, practice. That's the main thing I say when people are like, "What? How do I get into it?" I'm like, just do as much as you can because your eye will develop. And I don't think I feel like less than 5 years is you're probably still not maybe quite there yet. Like I don't know, everyone's different, but I feel like I wasn't there for 5 years. I think at 10 years I was like, yeah,
That's when you hit your
I've got
stride.
this.
That's when you hit your
Yeah.
stride, yeah. Yeah, I've got to say that was me as well. I didn't know if I was particularly slow or not. Like, it did take me a very long time. I think it was also a bit of a patchwork for me. I didn't sort of have one person sort of teaching me their way of doing things, which I think maybe you get a bit quicker because you've only got that one approach, but maybe in the long run you miss out on some of the diversity as well. Um, yeah, sorry, that's a bit of a tangent, but I love that you're doing that, and I really feel strongly about it. And it's just great to see that role coming back because it was very saddening to see when the major facilities were shutting down. The sort of mid levels who rose up, they would get juniors in for conforming and things like that, but they wouldn't necessarily be learning anything more than just how to get it in as sort of quickly as possible, and then they'd be booked on something else, like, for a different department even. So it sort of became like a technical part of a role as opposed to an apprenticeship model. And I think if you don't get a chance to apprentice, you're not really going to be any good. You kind of can't sprint to the end there. You have to kind of just do your time, right? So, yeah, really cool that you guys are doing that. I wanted to chat to you because you've mentioned a few long form jobs, but I've always known you to be really prominent in the short form space. So, can you tell me a little bit about moving from TVCs into long form, or were you always doing a bit of long form and I just wasn't aware of it?
No, you're absolutely right. At Digital Pictures, it was very much you do long form or you do commercials. There was no crossover. Actually, no, that's a lie. Adele Rafferty got to crossover, but I think she might have
Ah,
been the only colorist.
right.
And she was doing a series with a TVC director who she worked with a lot. So, but the mentality there was that we were very very different, different departments, which I never really understood because I think it's still the same craft. Sure, you have to work at a different pace, but um, it's a different, you know, it's not that all that different that to think, oh, well, like you can't do long form if you do commercials. I was in the commercial department. I just landed there. That's just where the job was. So that's kind of why I ended up starting in there. But I'm really grateful for that because I think a lot more of the colorists, at least in Melbourne, are going from commercials into long form rather than necessarily the other way around. And I'm not really sure why that is. But I like that I can and I know how to like very much fine tune something to that level in commercials, and that I can choose to do that if I have time in long form. But even in commercials, you have to work fast sometimes. So, yeah, this idea of them being so different, I don't necessarily agree with that. I think grading is grading, and if you've got the skill and the eye for it, then you can do it. Where it's very different is the client relationship.
Ah, interesting.
Mm.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a
Can you
different
tell me a little bit
hierarchy.
about that?
Yeah, there's just this different hierarchy in advertising. You start with your production company. So if you're lucky, you'll get a cinematographer in the room. You'll get to have a chat with them. And then you've got your director and then the producer. Like, hopefully you get them in first for like maybe an hour, and then your advertising agency will come in once the production is happy. That's the ideal. And then you might have an actual client, like the brand, come in to review and approve it as well. So that's your hierarchy. And basically, once brand and client come in, it doesn't matter what the cinematographer thinks. So you whereas in long form, the cinematographer is king, right? King, queen. Um, we're almost more, I think, in long form, it feels like I'm working for the cinematographer. It's a slightly different relationship, I think. Yeah. Every project's different, but in general, there's a different kind of hierarchy, and you're playing that role of guiding a room probably of more people. Although I would say, and it hasn't happened to me, I've done probably one feature film where we had a screening and there was more than 10 people, but most of the time I don't have teams that are more than three on a feature or a TV show. Um, Whereas in a commercial, again, you can have 10 plus people show up to talk about, the amber hue of the beer.
Yeah.
Silly.
Absolutely, absolutely. Oh, that's fascinating. So really it was just for you about taking what you already knew and using it in a different context as opposed to any kind of, it's not like they said, oh, well, in long form we have a different color, somewhere between purple
Oh
and
yeah,
green.
yeah. Oh, I guess there's different color spaces. I suppose
Sure.
like
Oh,
with
yeah.
P3,
Okay. Yeah.
but
Yeah.
and the trims and things like that. But I don't think P3 and Rec 709 are all that different. I think there's a different approach when you
Mm,
grade for theatre, for cinema, than you would for TV. And I don't believe that going from a theatrical grade to a like a TV Rec 709 grade is just a trim. I think you actually have to
mm,
think about the environment that your audience is now in, and so you probably have to adjust for brightness if you've done something darker
mm, mm.
as well. So there's that, but as far as the actual transformation, I don't think they're all that different.
Well, I've seen
Not
some
like HD
really,
art.
really great grades coming out of colorists who had sort of been pigeonholed in my mind as being short form, like yourself
Yeah,
and Fergus Rotherham and Matt Fez. There's been some
yeah,
really cool crossover, and I like to think that we're at a point where we can do both. So here's hoping, because I think they're just
yeah.
both really great for different ways, for different reasons. Like I wouldn't want to have to choose.
No, me too. I love the balance. I
Mm,
think last year I was doing so much long form. I was on this 8-part series, like 1 hour episode series. That was just a
wow,
huge
it's
part of
big.
my year. Yeah, quite a big show. And I was just never available for any of my commercial clients. And I'm like, please
Mm,
remember that I still do commercials.
mm,
I
mm.
like them. I
I,
just
I
wasn't
actually
available.
I actually think that might be one reason why people do tend to gravitate to one or the other because of the pace.
Mm,
You might do maybe 4 or 5 features or series in a year, but you might do thousands of commercials.
mm.
And, clients want to work with you, but if they'll get frustrated if they can't. And so they might form relationships elsewhere and you kind of end up on somebody else's books. Um,
Yeah.
did
Yeah,
so
it's a
was
bit of a
that
cycle there.
it? Yeah, there
Mm.
is a bit of a cycle. Did you find that most people were pretty understanding though of that 8-part series and just said, "Oh, cool, when will you be done?" Or
Well, the thing is too, it was kind of like spread out. So occasionally
oh,
I would
great.
be available, but it would be very much like someone's like, "You're probably not available, but are you?" And I'm like, "I actually am," and that was amazing. But that wasn't that often. It was more the other case.
With
Yeah,
series as well, there like you say, often it's one episode and then a break and then another episode. So sort of gone are the days of pushing all 8 episodes out really quickly.
yeah. Depends.
Um,
Sometimes it is. I mean, I've
yeah.
done some shows that are still like just jam packed, quick turnarounds. But I find often at the moment, visual effects end up um, taking us on, and you're meant to have finished something. I was meant to finish one show months ago. Still haven't finished it.
Yeah. Well, speaking of visual effects, I mean, can you talk to me a little bit about the portable door? Because I had a look at the trailer. I haven't watched it, but the trailer looks amazing. And I couldn't help but notice that there's a heck of a lot of visual effects in that one.
Yeah, yeah, that was a big VFX job. Actually, sometimes. No, it was big. I was going to say sometimes some shows and films can feel really VFX heavy when there's a lot of fantasy elements, and then
Mm,
some of the more mundane stuff that you're like, there's no VFX in that. It has more,
that's so
and you
true.
have to work harder to kind of blend all that stuff in when
That's
it's
so
more
true.
like reality. Um, but I loved working on the portable door. It was really wonderful. I managed to. It was a strange one because the director and the DOP weren't based in Melbourne. But we had some time to brief together in the beginning, and then they sort of came back in after I think I'd done a second pass. So they were very hands off. We had a wonderful briefing session setting up looks, and then they were off, and then I was sort of left on my own to my own devices. And if I had an idea, I'd kind of chat with them about it and say, "What do you think about this?" And most of the time, they were really excited for my ideas, which is just a wonderful feeling when you feel like you really are contributing to the project. Yeah. So, and there were some sequences that we really helped along, you know, those visual effects as well. Get it all married in and blended in
Mm,
and stuff.
mm.
It's a cool film. It was really fun, just a
Oh,
lot of fun.
great. Did
Mm.
you did you often have the visual effects in the conform when you would begin an when you would begin a scene, or would it be a matter of grading the plates and then seeing what the visual effects ended up looking like, and then potentially tweaking to fit them into the world?
Yeah, I think the idea going into any feature is to get those VFX in before the grade, but that does not always happen. So yeah, the idea was there, but no, there were some big holes when we started, and then of course there's a bit of a break there, and we come back once the VFX are done and do that final pass. So yeah, there were some big scenes uh, that were kind of, I think they were on green screen. Oh, kind of, gosh, it was a while ago now. Some of these projects you do ages ago, and then they like, I don't know why, but it took a while for it to come out. I was like, where's this film I graded?
When you do a green screen shot or a green screen scene, I'd be interested to know whether or not like de-spill and things like that coming back in visual effects completely change the grade, or do you find that you can actually grade those plates? Like, because when it's a completely green screen or a completely blue environment, there's a heck of a lot of spill.
Yeah, yeah, the day spill definitely affects the environment. Sometimes more than other, depending on the, of course, the environment. But no, I had to on a recent show, there was a piece of wardrobe which they should not have put on in front of a green screen. It had a bit of teal in it, um, and the D-spill like completely took all green out of that element of wardrobe to the point where I'm like, and because the rest of the piece of like it was a jacket, and the rest of the jacket was blue, and then this piece that was more meant to be teal had turned blue. So there was no way other than masking and tracking this, panel for me to then match that across the whole episode. And so I had to go and I had to wipe out that teal part of that wardrobe. So sorry, wardrobe, but
Oh, no, so it was
I
actually
changed it.
quicker to take it out of the whole
Yeah,
episode than it was. Wow,
it was
okay.
way quicker. Mm.
Oh, wow. Well, that would have been quite a surgical operation.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I just said this is what we're doing because I was like, no one's going to opt for me to mask and track every, all the panels on their shoulder and yeah.
So, could you tell me a little bit about where you think the industry is headed, the direction that things are going in? Because obviously, starting a new company, you're thinking about what people need right now, not what they needed 10 years ago.
I think keeping trying to there's a couple of things right with where we're going as an industry. It's like where do I want us to go? And having conversations with other colorists, like what are their struggles? What could be improved in our industry? And having that experience of doing dailies and stuff gives me like that insight into maybe a better time, you know, uh, and a solution perhaps for offline eyes, as we call them, when people get used to something looking a certain way. So I want to see the industry change in that capacity, but obviously technology is changing, cloud-based stuff. Then we've also, obviously HDR. So, in the capacity of what I want the industry to do, we want to do the film looks and the development and our, we call it grade as you go approach to dailies. But I also see things evolving in the space of, cloud workflows, virtual workstations, HDR. There's even like a little bit of this AI stuff that's coming through, and we have to look at ways that we're going to implement that in our workflows, and not to feel threatened by the idea that uh, automatic grading and matching tools are going to become more prevalent, because I think there's more to what we do than matching, and I think what we consider natural uh, is so relative to our environment, to our perception, and that's kind of the beauty of the human visual system, is it's adaptable, and we can do a pretty strong look without people realizing and affect the tone and the feeling of a project. I love that about what we do. So it's ways of using that new technology to deliver that faster and to more people. Being self-taught, like learning color by myself from tutorials as the beginning of my journey, kind of gives me a really big appreciation for the everyday consumer having access to our tools, and that's why we are a Resolve facility, and that's why I still think it's really wonderful to have that accessible for people, because you're encouraging people to understand what we do and to get involved in what we do as well. And I think that can only help our craft. I don't want to see this kind of gatekeeping that some, the big facilities used to do. Where it's like, oh, you can only do this if you know someone, or if you're fortunate like me to get in the door. But I really pushed my way into that door. So I think moving with those trends is something Moodlab, is focused on, and that's our kind of ethos, is keeping things more accessible, more broad, more general, and trying to improve practices across the industry, and not just for high budget productions. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Well, I think that it's going to be very successful, because surely with something kind of as, I don't want to say the word obvious, but something that you really need, right? Like color, you can't get away from it. As soon as you start rolling, there's color on screen. So, just being part of that earlier, I think people are going to get hooked on it once they start to see, oh, we can do this. Okay.
Yeah, I hope so. One other thing we want to do is archive properly. People don't really archive properly. So that's part of the offering is, can go. We have
What do you
hot
mean
storage and
by
we have cold storage.
what do you mean by archive properly?
I would say, particularly in advertising, and we often hear of quite big ad campaigns losing all their dailies or their camera rushes because someone hasn't archived it.
Got you.
In any kind of reasonable way. So we want to offer that to clients as well, where
Oh, that's fabulous.
Your dailies can go into cold storage and it's there. I'm not sure at this stage if I want to do LTOs. We'll have it as an option, but I'll outsource that. I don't know. I just want to invest in like new technology.
Yeah, LTO sort of does feel like old technology, but I've actually had that thought myself a few times. I've been archiving stuff off to like 10 terabyte drives and going, this might be better on an LTO, because there's nothing worse than having your drive and you've got a duplicate of your drive, and then you've got one in the safe somewhere, and then before you know it, you've spent thousands of dollars on drives, and you're like, probably could have just afforded that LTO deck. Definitely a consideration.
Totally, and I won't say I completely won't do it, but it certainly isn't something I'm excited by.
Oh, I don't think anyone in their right mind is excited by LTOs. And look, if you are, I don't want to yuck your yum, but geez, almost like get a life, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's better than not archiving anything.
True.
Or putting it on old hard drives, spinning drives, and sitting them in a shelf for years and years, and then going to load them, and of course the drive won't spin.
Yes,
which happens a lot.
It happens so much.
Yeah.
Oh, well, look, thank you so much. CJ, it's been great having a chat with you. I've really enjoyed hearing about Moodlabs, and I can't wait to see where you guys go in the future. Maybe we'll do a check back in at some point to see how it's all progressed, because you're very new.
Yeah, so new.
Well, I'm wishing you all the
baby
best.
Company. Thank you so much. It was really wonderful to talk with you.
Such a pleasure. Anytime. For Mixing Light, this is Kaylee Bateman. Thanks a lot, everyone.